So we're drawing almost to a close on this series, which has affected my life in a very profound way. I think is often the case when one delves deeply into something, whatever it may be, it always ends up working like yeast in your own heart and in your own life. And you, as the conduit or the talker of everything, ends up very often having to live those very truths. So I am aware that this is a powerful book and with powerful lessons and things to grapple with and embrace and to learn from. And there's so much packed into this 300, I think it's 300 pages book, 230. And it's an almost impossible task to take these 5 chapters and squeeze them into 15, 20 minutes on a Sunday. So I'm going to do my very best to honor and really represent the treasure trove that this part 4 of the invitation is. But as you can see from the title of today's service, it's called Find the Place of Rest Between. And there are 3 little beats or 3 small acts that I would like to share in this overall time of speaking with you today. And they are as follows. The first one is calm in the storm. The second is, and those of you who have been to London will know this refrain very well, mind the gap. And then the third one is courageous presence. So let's dive in together. I hope that I don't overwhelm or overload, but in an attempt to do justice to Frank's amazing, amazing book and amazing chapter, let's start off with a beautiful story that he shares about a woman called Adele. And as you know from our explorations together, he set up the Meta Institute, which was an alternative to many forms of hospice care that have been available, especially in the United States. So his work was founded and based in the San Francisco area. And of course, many of his stories take place in the very experience of offering hospice and care to those who are on that edge, but drawing close to the veil between this life and whatever is on the other side. And he speaks about a woman called Adele, who was Jewish by tradition, but in her own admission was an atheist. And was struggling not so much with, I think, the philosophy and the meaning of life and everything that was happening to her, but was struggling with her own pain, and it was not a pleasant experience for her, and she felt quite alone. There wasn't enough family or friends around her. So Frank spent a great deal of time at her side. And the more frustrated and upset she was getting, the more anxious she was becoming. And Frank said to her, look, I don't want to talk to you about God or religion or anything like that, but I do want to make one little observation, and it's this. Have you noticed that as hard and difficult as your breathing is, there's a little pause at the end of each exhale? Have you noticed that? And she said, no, I hadn't, but now that you mention it, I do. And he said, well, why don't you put your attention at that pause just for a little while? And of course, she didn't give a 2 bars about Buddhism or anything like that, but she just wanted to be free from pain. So she said, okay, I'll agree. And then he said, and I think this is a beautiful thing to offer one another in whatever capacity, like we did earlier in the meditation. I'll breathe with you. Beautiful. And as she did, fear gradually drained from her face, and eventually she put her head back on the pillow, and a short while later, she peacefully died. And therefore, this chapter really is talking about that a place of rest is available to us always. We need only turn towards it. There's a beautiful story he shares of a Zen monk who was busy sweeping the area of the monastery, and another monk walked past, and in a sort of a very judgmental and disdainful stance said, "Too busy." And the other monk just smiled and thought to himself, that's what I might look like from the outside. Too busy on the outside, but calm on the inside. And that's what we're going to explore in these next few moments. When we're caught in a time-driven scarcity mentality or tumbling unconsciously from one moment to the next, we can become prisoners of our own thoughts. And finding a place of rest is not necessarily taking a nap. It can be, but it's more than that. It is, as Frank says, a choice. It's a choice to be alert, attentive, and mindful. And he reminds us that busyness can, in fact, be an armor. It's sometimes there in our lives to lock out pain and stress and feelings that maybe we don't want to feel. And Frank says, it prevents us, or prevents tenderness rather, from entering our lives. I thought that was interesting, that it's tenderness, the things that we are fearing and we're pushing away, what comes in ultimately, or wanting to come in, is tenderness. There are two things that we can never do in the fast lane of our lives. We can't deepen our experience or integrate it. Now, I learned from reading the book that Frank, apart from all the other amazing things that he does, including writing and lecturing and touring the world, and of course, running his Metta Institute, he's a deep sea diver. And he says that one of his favorite things to do is, if it's possible and it's not too deep, he likes to dive down and sit on the ocean floor and enjoy that hearing, because of course when you're wearing the mask, you're hearing your own breath, really conscious of how it is keeping you alive. And as he rises, of course, he rises through the stillness, through the dark, very often enjoying whatever it is that's at the bottom of the sea, and observing things like the fish swimming through the coral, which really in a way we could think of as our thoughts. Observing them, enjoying them, and he rises and he rises. And of course, the closer you get to the surface, he says, that's where the turbulence hits you. That's where the tides start coming in. That's where the movement and the agitation of the waves are. So in a way, very much the reverse is, we live on that surface of the sea, like a boat battered around by the waves and carried on the tides and experiencing the turbulence. And the call is to drop deeper into the depth, and if possible, to sit on the ocean floor just to observe. The universal antidote to all of this turbulence is mindfulness. And I love what he says, that the obstacles become the path. The obstacles become the path. And that the missteps that we make, if we can even call them that, are also gateways. Let me share with you a few profound words from the philosopher Blaise Pascal. And he said this: I have often said that the sole cause of man's or our, should I say, our unhappiness is that we do not know how to stay quietly in our room. The deeper we go within ourselves, the more expansive we become. We allow everything to show itself, even what is buried in our unconscious. There is no need to repress the unwanted parts of our situations, of ourselves, or of others. And we can, in fact, allow thoughts, feelings, ideas to come and go without being swept away by any of them. In other words, and very much the reason I wanted to start off with the Rumi quote is, we can become refuges to ourselves, a refuge to ourself, a refuge to myself. And I love, as I was preparing this about that whole idea of acceptance, I struggle somehow with the word of acceptance because it feels quite judgmental in a way, and it feels almost that we are sifting it. And of course, it's not ours to do. But what it is ours to do is to allow. And let me explain what I mean by that. A dear friend of mine who has done a lot of work around, and here's his name again, of course, Rumi. Rumi's poem about the guest house, which I know I've shared with you before. But if you remember the poem, you remember that it's not all positive things and positive feelings and positive experiences that are invited to the table, but it's all of them, including the one that comes immediately to mind, or some are anger and fear and depression. And Rumi says, invite them all in. Well, my friend has spent many years as a therapist using the guest house as a model, and recently has discovered that she has been diagnosed with cancer. And suddenly, she's now having to live this very thing about how does she allow even the cancer to come and sit at her table. So it's not accepting, but it's allowing and seeing what it may have to offer us. What's its message? There are some things like a little checklist that he gives, but before I share them, I want to say that I don't know about you. I mean, I've traveled the world. I've been to 40 countries thus far in my life. 40, not 14. 40. I am an incurable, curious explorer of the world. But I can be a little OCD, especially because in my travels, I've actually lost my passport twice. And so I tend to find I get a little OCD when I'm at the airport. So I keep opening my bag and I keep going, okay, passport, check. Credit card, check. Phone, check. Keys, check. I don't know how many times I do it. I don't know what I think is going to happen between one doorway and the next, but I keep checking. And so there's a checklist that Frank gives in his book, and I love it. And I wonder if I can employ that instead of just checking for my passport, my credit card, but this. To allow myself to go through the turbulence, drop to the bottom of the ocean, sit, watch the fish in the coral, and say to myself, body at rest, check. Heart at rest, check. Mind at rest, check. Consciousness at rest, check. With that checklist, I think we can be like the monk, busy sweeping, but calm on the inside and functioning from a place of peace. The next part, of course, calm in the storm. Impermanence, as we know, is true. All things change. All things change. To say that all things change and it's sad is the story that we tell ourselves. In other words, the way we experience something shapes how the next one might arise. But breath, as Frank reminds us, is what offers us the chance to study our relationship with endings. Interesting. Breathe, he says, or rather, let the breath breathe you. Of course, I'm showing my age now, but in the late 80s and early 90s, it was very popular to read and have a copy of this book. I wonder if you know it too. Feel the fear, do it anyway. What we must implore of ourselves and of each other is that we don't negate strong, or in the spiritual community sometimes can be labeled negative emotions. Back to the guest house, all of them are welcome because all of them are me. And so in a way to explore them, not expel them. Breath invites us not only into the moment, but inside us, that place where, as Rumi said, we knock on the door from the inside. Let me share a John O'Donoghue quote, which I love. We need to come home to the temple of our senses. Our bodies know that they belong. It's our minds that make us homeless. Frank says, let there be light. For those of you who know from the Christian tradition, from the creation story of the Bible, that wonderful command, let there be light. And I really meditated on that in the past 2 weeks since I've been preparing for today. And I thought to myself, I've always ever known it as the meaning of let there be light. It's like a command, you know, like may there, or there must be, or there shall be, or there will be. But as I meditated, I thought, goodness, what's the other meaning of let? Let is, of course, allow. Let there be light. Where whatever we're grappling with, whatever is causing turbulence, commotion, angst, fear, nervousness, anxiety, to say, let there be light. I'm fascinated by the concept of trapeze, that mind the gap that we were talking about earlier. That place where you leave one swinging trapeze and you're held in time and space, almost in defiance of gravity, but of course you're not, it's all in the motion, but you're in that powerful, pregnant pause between one thing ending and another thing about to begin that you're catching hold of. It's like the ruach, the creative life force that blows us, holds us, carries us between the ending, quote unquote, and the beginning. And Debussy is quoted, or credited rather, with saying this, and I love it. And for those people, the musicians amongst us, I think you'll love it too. Music is the space between notes. It's the pregnant pause, full of opportunity. And so to the last part. When fear speaks, courage is the heart's answer. And this is Frank's invitation to us to be courageously present, or courageous presence as he calls it. I want to share with you a couple of stories before I close. The first one is this. He talks about, and this is a true story of someone that he ended up working with. Her name is Janet. She was the mother of a young son, and they were having a family and friend gathering in their backyard, summertime barbecue, I imagine. And she looked around and suddenly noticed that the two young boys weren't there in the garden anymore. And she turned to the other adults and said, has anybody seen them? I'm worried about them. Oh, don't worry, they said, just relax. They're fine. They're just boys. They're just having fun. Moments later, there's a crash and a scream. And as they ran out through the front of the house, of course, that which they feared most, or she feared most, had happened. And her son had run in front of the path of an oncoming car and had been hit. They, of course, rushed him to ER, and at first it looked like he would be stabilized and fine. But sadly, he never made it, and this young boy died from the seriousness of his injuries. Now, the driver had not stopped, and they didn't know who it was. But the next day, there was a knock at their front door, and Janet goes to answer the door, and there's an older man, a stranger, who appeared there. And he said, it's me who killed your son. I didn't realize that I'd hit anything. And I'm so sorry, if sorry is indeed the word I can say. Well, of course, I'm not telling you the story because it has a happy, tidy ending, because these things never do. Of course, then Janet and her family and her husband had to go through a tremendous amount of reckoning, suffering, grief to be worked through. Yet, Janet went on to become one of the most amazing hospice carers and experts in the field that Frank says he has ever worked with. That through this work, through this courageous presence to be what was present in response to what had happened, she transmuted this pain and grief and loss into healing for others. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow said, and I want, as I say it, I want you to imagine standing and looking at that man through the screen door, that stranger who'd killed the son. It's a profound challenge, but Frank says it's something that's available to all of us. He's lived it, he's seen it, he's experienced it. And Longfellow's words are this: if we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each man's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. Courage, says Frank, helps us to stay steadfast in the face of even the most extreme difficulty. To one, turn towards suffering, our own suffering, and others. Two, risk the known for the unknown. And three, confront even our own ignorance. And let me finish with one last story, and it's this. A samurai climbed a mountain to reach a small temple. There, the warrior found a monk calmly sitting in meditation. "Monk," commanded the samurai in a voice accustomed to obedience, "teach me about heaven and hell." The monk looked up at the warrior and replied with utter disdain, "Teach you about heaven and hell? I couldn't teach you anything. You are ignorant, dirty, a disgrace to the samurai class. Get out of my sight." The samurai grew furious, and looking at the monk, he was overcome with rage and pulled out his sword and was prepared to slay the monk. And looking straight into the samurai's eyes, the monk said, "That's hell." The samurai froze, recognizing the compassion of the monk, who had risked his own life to show him this lesson. The warrior put down his sword, and he bowed in respect and gratitude to the monk. And the monk said softly, "And that is heaven." In closing, let me say this, that Frank is very clear in his book, and I want to share it with you also, that fearlessness and courage and ability to be in the gap and be with the unknown is not about eliminating or ignoring or pushing anything away, including fear. It's about developing the capacity to be courageously present with it. Courage, he said, asks us, if you can believe, to be undefended, to do just as the samurai did, to put our swords down. Vulnerability itself is a type of courage. We are nothing. Nothing is fixed. And so, as I said earlier when we started, that idea of the holding environment, what is it? Well, these are the words and the understanding of a preeminent English pediatrician and psychologist who's worked a lot, of course, with children. He calls it the holding environment. And Frank experienced this himself at the birth of his son. It was a difficult, difficult birth. And his son, Gabe, was born inconsolable. Frank said that he had this instinct to gather him and take the baby and put him against his chest and allow their breathing to meld. And he said, "I loaned him my nervous system. I didn't judge him. I just held him and let his upset spill out of him." And Frank's closing question is this: what we thought of as awareness, can this be our holding environment? Awareness, he said, is the ultimate resting place where we can let all of these things spill out and have their moment, but they always come back to the breath and to the holding. And so at some point, either today, later tonight, maybe, I'd love to ask you to perhaps bring awareness even to something that you do without thinking. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Eckhart Tolle, you see, he makes a cup of tea and he does it so mindfully, and he does it on video, so you can actually watch it on YouTube. But maybe make a cup of tea or make a coffee and do every single step with mindfulness. This is awareness, and this is our resting place. Thank you, everybody.
If you like this video, Please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.